Some fights aren't about what people think they're about. This one was never about the money. Not really, even though that's what they came to me screaming about. I had two brothers in front of me, Mark and David. Before they even set foot on my stage, I'd read the file, I'd seen the emails, I'd listened to the pre-interviews. The paperwork painted a picture of a family business, a legacy built by their father that had crashed and burned in a spectacular fashion. The narrative they each wanted to sell was simple. Mark, the older brother, sat in the green room with a posture so rigid I thought he might snap. He had his story rehearsed. His talking points were all lined up. David was reckless. David was irresponsible. David was a dreamer who gambled away their father's life's work. He'd labeled his brother the problem, and he was here for me to co-sign that diagnosis. Then there was David. He was in a separate room, pacing. He couldn't sit still. He had the nervous energy of a man who's been on the defensive for so long, it's become his natural state. His story was that Mark was a tyrant, a micromanager with no vision who strangled the business with his fear and control. According to David, he wasn't the problem. He was the one trying to save them from mediocrity, and Mark was the one who sabotaged it all. He had a label for his brother, too, the saboteur. So you have the problem and the saboteur. Two men, brothers, who had taken the complex, messy, and painful story of their family's failure and boiled it down into a simple, digestible narrative where the other guy was the villain. That's a huge red flag right there. Life isn't that simple. When the story is that clean, it's almost always a work of fiction. My job wasn't to figure out who lost the money. My job was to figure out what they were really fighting about. The business was called Sterling & Sons Construction. Their father, a man named Arthur Sterling, was by all accounts a legend in his local community. He started with a hammer and a pickup truck and built an empire. He was a man of principles, of handshakes and hard work. He was also the sun around which these two suns orbited. From everything I could gather, his approval was the only currency that ever truly mattered in that family. And that, right there, is where the real story begins. Mark was the firstborn. He was the one who followed his father around job sites as a boy. He learned the books, the logistics, the management. He was predictable, reliable, and responsible. He was groomed to take over. In his mind, the line of succession was clear. He was the heir apparent, the steward of the legacy. The payoff for him was being seen as the good son, the one Arthur could count on. David was the artist, the visionary. He didn't see buildings as concrete and rebar. He saw them as statements. He went to school for architecture, came back with big ideas about modern design, sustainable materials, and pushing the company into a new era. He was the prodigal son, the one who was exciting and unpredictable. His currency wasn't reliability, it was innovation. He wanted to earn his father's approval not by maintaining the empire, but by expanding it, by making his own mark on it. You see the conflict brewing already, don't you? It's a classic dynamic, the caretaker and the risk taker, the pragmatist and the dreamer. As long as their father, Arthur, was alive, he was the referee. He was a strong enough presence to manage these two opposing energies. He could listen to David's big ideas and then turn to Mark to figure out if they were financially viable. He kept them in balance. But then Arthur got sick. A sudden, aggressive cancer. And in less than a year, he was gone. He left the company to them both, a 50-over-50 split. He thought he was leaving them a legacy. What he really left them was a battleground. He left them without a referee. In the first year after his death, they tried to make it work. I saw the reports. Mark, as CEO, held the purse strings tight. He was terrified of losing what his father had built. Every decision was filtered through the lens of fear. David, as the head of design and development, felt suffocated. He'd bring a bold new project to the table, and Mark would shut it down with a spreadsheet pointing to the risk, the overhead. David saw it as a lack of faith. Mark saw it as prudence. They weren't just arguing about business strategy. They were arguing about their father. David would say, "Dad would have loved this idea." And Mark would counter with, "Dad would never have risked the company on a maybe." They were both claiming to know the ghost in the room. They were both using their dead father as a weapon in their own war for control and validation. This is a common pattern in families dealing with grief and legacy. The unresolved issues with the parent get projected onto the siblings. They weren't just fighting for the future of Sterling and Sons. They were fighting for the title of who was the better son, who understood their father's true heart. And that is a fight with no winner. The thing about a fight with no winner is that both sides will bleed themselves dry trying to be the last one standing. They mistake endurance for victory. That's what I was looking at with Mark and David. The specifics of their collapse weren't unique. I've seen versions of this story 100 times. It always starts with a critical incident, a flashpoint where the simmering resentment boils over into open warfare. For them, it was a project David called the Meridian. It was a high-end, multi-use riverfront development. It was ambitious, it was flashy, and it was pure David. The architectural renderings were beautiful. The vision was compelling. It was also, from a financial standpoint, a massive gamble. It required a huge upfront investment, a host of zoning variances, and a belief that the market would embrace a luxury concept far beyond anything Sterling and Sons had ever attempted before. David brought this to Mark with stars in his eyes. This was his masterpiece. This was the project that would not only save the company, but redefine it. It would make their father's name synonymous with modern innovation, not just old school reliability. He wasn't just selling a building, he was selling a new legacy. And Mark, operating from a place of pure, unadulterated fear, saw none of that. He saw risk, he saw debt, he saw the potential to lose everything his father had spent 50 years building. He ran the numbers, and they were terrifying. The profit margins were thin, and the liabilities were enormous. So he said no. Not let's rework it, not let's find a way, but a flat, hard no. Now, a healthy partnership would have a process for this. They'd debate, they'd compromise, they'd find a middle ground. But these two weren't in a healthy partnership. They were in a psychological cage match. When Mark said no, David didn't hear a business decision. He heard your ideas are worthless. He heard you are not to be trusted. He heard his father's ghost channeled through his brother telling him he wasn't good enough. The old wound of being the artistic, less serious son was ripped wide open. And when David kept pushing, Mark didn't hear passion. He heard recklessness. He heard disrespect for their father's legacy. He saw his irresponsible little brother trying to burn the kingdom down just to prove a point. The payoff for Mark was in being the guardian, the protector. David's vision was a direct threat to that identity. So what does a person do when they feel trapped, unheard, and invalidated? They go rogue. David, convinced of his own vision and fueled by a sense of righteous indignation, went behind Mark's back. He leveraged some of the company's assets and brought in an outside investor, a friend of a friend, to secure the initial funding. He believed that once the project was underway and Mark saw it taking shape, he would have no choice but to get on board. He thought he could force his brother to see his brilliance. That's a classic error in judgment. You cannot force someone to see your point of view by betraying their trust. It doesn't work that way ever. All you do is give them a legitimate reason to resent you. The Meridian project broke ground. For a few months, it was a flurry of activity. David was in his element, managing designers, meeting with city planners. Mark, who discovered the financial maneuvering after the fact, was trapped. If he pulled the plug, the company would face immediate lawsuits and a catastrophic financial loss. If he let it continue, he was complicit in a gamble he was certain would fail. He chose to freeze. He became an obstructionist, questioning every invoice, delaying every payment he could, creating a paper trail to prove he was never on board. He was building his case for when it all came crashing down. He didn't have to wait long. The outside investor got cold feet when the zoning variances took longer than expected. Construction costs soared. A key subcontractor went bankrupt. The entire project became a house of cards in a hurricane. Within 6 months, it was a disaster. A half-finished shell of a building sat on the riverfront, a monument to their dysfunction. Sterling & Sons was on the hook for millions. Their credit was shot, their reputation was in tatters, and they had to lay off employees who had worked for their father for decades. This is where the story turns truly toxic. David didn't take responsibility. He blamed Mark. "You starved the project," he'd scream. "You wanted it to fail from the beginning." And Mark, with his mountain of paperwork, would calmly reply, "I have the documents that show this was your reckless decision. You did this." They stopped speaking. Communication happened only through lawyers. They were suing each other over the dissolution of their own family business. The fight was no longer about vision or strategy. It was about blame. It was a desperate, ugly battle to rewrite history. Mark needed the official record to state that he was the responsible one who tried to stop the train wreck. David needed it to state that he was the visionary genius whose masterpiece was sabotaged by his jealous, small-minded brother. They were both willing to destroy the last vestiges of their family to win that argument. That's when their mother, at her wit's end, called my show. She didn't care about the money anymore. She cared that her 2 sons, the only family she had left, hated each other more than they loved the memory of the man who gave them everything. So they arrive on my stage. The air between them is so thick with animosity you could cut it with a knife. Mark is sitting there, arms crossed, jaw set. He's got a file folder on his lap, his evidence. He's ready to prosecute his case. David is on the edge of his seat, vibrating with a kind of frantic energy. He looks like a man who hasn't had a peaceful night's sleep in years. I don't start with the business. I never start with the presenting problem. The business is just the symptom. The disease is the breakdown in their relationship. The rot that set in long before the Meridian project was ever conceived. The real problem is that these 2 grown men don't know how to be brothers without their father acting as a buffer between them. Mark, I start keeping my tone level. You say David is the problem. You say he's reckless and single-handedly destroyed your father's legacy. Is that a fair summary? He nods. A sharp, definitive gesture. It's not a summary, Dr. Phil. It's a fact. I have the bank statements, the loan agreements he signed without my authority, the emails where I warned him. It's all there. He pats the folder. His "I told you so" file. I turn to David. And you, David, you say Mark is the saboteur, that he's a control freak who was so afraid of you succeeding that he deliberately undermined the project and choked it of its resources. Is that right? Absolutely, David says, his voice rising. He's been jealous of me my whole life. He couldn't stand the thought that I might be the one to take Dad's company to the next level. He wanted me to fail. Listen to the language they're using. Jealous, reckless. These aren't business terms. These are personal attacks. They're character assassinations. They've stopped seeing each other as brothers and now only see the labels they've created. This is a crucial defense mechanism. If you can convince yourself the other person is fundamentally flawed, that they are in their essence a problem or a saboteur, then you don't have to look at your own contribution to the mess. You absolve yourself of all responsibility. So I have to deconstruct that. I have to get them out of the courtroom they've built in their minds and back into the family. I've read the file, Mark, I say, gesturing to his folder. I've seen the financials. There's no doubt that David went around you and made some high-risk decisions. We can all agree on that. But let's rewind before the Meridian. Talk to me about the first year after your father passed. What was that like for you? He's thrown off. This isn't on his script. He wanted to talk about loan agreements. I'm asking him about feelings. He hesitates. It was difficult. There was a lot to manage. Difficult how? I press. What was the weight on your shoulders? The weight of everything, he says, his voice cracking just a little. My father's name was on that building. Every employee, every client, they were all looking at me. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't be the son who lost it all. There it is, the fear, not just of business failure, but of personal filial failure. His identity was completely wrapped up in being the reliable son. The payoff was his father's perceived pride. With his father gone, he was now performing for a ghost. And the fear of disappointing that ghost was paralyzing. He wasn't just managing a company, he was curating a memory. I turned to David. David, when you came to Mark with the plans for the Meridian, what were you hoping for? What did you want from him? I wanted him to see the vision, he says, animated. I wanted him to be excited. I wanted him to say, wow, Dave, this is incredible. Dad would be so proud. So you weren't just looking for a business partner. I say you were looking for a brother. You were looking for validation. You wanted him to step into your father's shoes and give you the approval you were looking for. He's quiet for a moment. The anger drains out of his face, replaced by a flicker of something raw. Yeah, he says softly, I guess I was. This is the first crack in the armor. We've moved from the what, the business, to the why, the emotional need. Both of them were grieving. Both of them felt lost without their father's guidance. And instead of turning toward each other for support, they turned on each other. Mark tried to become his father, embodying what he thought was his father's prudence. David tried to impress his father, chasing a grand gesture to prove his worth. They were both desperately trying to fill the same void, but they were doing it in ways that put them in direct opposition. Mark, I say, going back to him, when David came to you with that project, you saw risk, but did you also maybe see him getting all the attention? The flashy architect with the big, exciting ideas. Did any part of you feel overlooked? You're the one doing the hard, thankless work behind the scenes, and he's the one getting to dream. He wants to deny it. I can see the no forming on his lips. But I hold his gaze. I'm not accusing him. I'm offering an explanation for his behavior that goes beyond him just being a control freak. He looks down at his hands. My father always said, take care of the foundation and the house will stand. I was taking care of the foundation. David was. He was picking out drapes for a room we hadn't even built yet. It felt like he didn't respect the work, my work. It felt like he didn't respect you, I correct gently. He nods, a slow, painful admission. And there's the core of it. Two brothers, each feeling disrespected, unseen, and invalidated by the other. The millions of dollars, the lawsuits, the angry emails, it was all just noise. The real fight was about a fundamental human need to be valued by the people who are supposed to know you best. The business didn't ruin their family. The broken family dynamic, which had been there all along, bubbling under the surface, was what ruined the business. Their father wasn't the glue holding them together. He was the lid holding all this down. And when he was gone, it exploded. Now we're getting somewhere. We've peeled back the first layer of the onion, the anger, and we're getting to the sadness and fear underneath. This is the critical stage. You can't resolve a conflict if you're not arguing about the right thing. Arguing about who signed which loan document is a dead end. Arguing about why one brother felt disrespected and the other felt invalidated, that's a conversation that can actually lead to a breakthrough, but it's also the most dangerous stage. This is where the defenses go up. It's one thing to admit these feelings in a quiet, reflective moment. It's another to own them in front of the person you've designated as your enemy. The blame is a shield, and I'm asking them to put it down. That leaves them feeling exposed and vulnerable. So let me get this straight. I say, summarizing for clarity, looking back and forth between them. Mark, you're running the company from a place of fear of letting your father's memory down, and you felt that David's big, risky ideas were a direct threat to that legacy, a sign of disrespect for the hard foundational work you were doing. Is that accurate? He gives a tight, single nod. It's an admission, but not a surrender. And David, I continue, you're operating from a place of needing to prove yourself, of wanting to make your own mark and finally get the kind of wow approval you felt you never quite got. And when Mark shut down your idea, it wasn't a business decision to you, it was a personal rejection. It felt like he was saying you weren't good enough. Is that accurate? David looks away toward the audience as if searching for an escape route. When you put it like that, he trails off. He can't deny it. The truth of it is, sitting there, plain as day, this whole disaster, I state, leaning forward, this entire multi-million-dollar catastrophe happened because two brothers stopped talking to each other and started reacting to the stories they were telling themselves about each other. You, I point to Mark, told yourself a story that David was a reckless child who needed to be controlled. And you, I point to David, told yourself a story that Mark was a jealous tyrant who wanted you to fail. And you both went out and behaved in a way that made the other person's story come true. This is the feedback loop of dysfunction. Mark's control made David feel he had to be reckless and go behind his back. David's secretive, high-risk behavior confirmed all of Mark's fears and made him clamp down even harder. Each one's behavior was a reaction to their perception of the other, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. They co-created this nightmare. I want to talk about the Meridian, I say, and I see Mark instinctively reach for his folder. I put my hand up. No, not the financials, not the contracts. I want to talk about the day you told him no, Mark. David walks into your office. He's excited. He's passionate. He lays out this grand vision. What was the first thing you felt? He thinks for a second. Anxiety, he says, just a knot in my stomach. Okay. What did you say to him? I told him it was impossible. I showed him the numbers. I said there was no way. Did you say, David, I see the beauty in this. I see your passion, but I am terrified of the financial risk? Did you tell him about the weight you were feeling, the fear of failing your father's memory? Mark just stares at me. Of course he didn't. Men in his family, in many families, aren't taught to communicate their fear. They're taught to communicate strength, control, authority. He translated his fear into a hard no, which David then interpreted as a personal attack. And David, I turned to him. When he said no, what did you do? I argued. I tried to convince him. I told him he had no vision. Did you say, Mark, I need you to believe in me. This is more than just a building to me. This is my chance to prove myself, and it hurts that you don't seem to trust me. Did you acknowledge the pressure he was under? The look on David's face says it all. He didn't see the pressure Mark was under He only saw an obstacle. He only saw his own need. So neither one of you was honest, I say, letting the words hang in the air. You weren't honest about your fears, your needs, your feelings. You hid behind business jargon and accusations. You treated each other like adversaries in a boardroom instead of brothers in a foxhole. You were both grieving your father, you were both scared, and instead of leaning on each other, you drew a line in the sand. And now you're standing in the ruins of everything he built, pointing fingers. For what? So you can win? What does winning look like here? Bankrupting the company and never speaking to your only brother again? Is that the prize? The studio is silent. I can see the wheels turning in their heads. This is the confrontation. Not me screaming at them, but me holding up a mirror so clear and so bright that they can't avoid seeing the truth of their own behavior. The labels they've been using, the problem, the saboteur, are starting to dissolve, revealing the scared, grieving men underneath. Mark speaks first, his voice thick. He went behind my back. He lied. You're right, I say. He did. And David, that was a betrayal. It was a cowardly move. You were afraid you couldn't win the argument on its merits, so you cheated. Why? David looks at his brother, really looks at him for the first time since they sat down. Because I knew you wouldn't listen, he says, his voice barely a whisper. I knew you'd already made up your mind about me, that I was just the screw-up little brother. I was so desperate to prove you wrong. And Mark, I say, you created an environment where your brother felt he had to lie to be heard. You weren't a partner, you were a gatekeeper. By translating your fear into control, you pushed him away. You left him no other option in his mind. This is the hardest part for people to accept, the concept of mutual responsibility. It's so much easier to be the victim, but in most family conflicts, everyone has a role. Everyone contributes to the dynamic. Mark's rigidity didn't cause David's betrayal, but it certainly set the stage for it. David's actions weren't excused by Mark's attitude, but they were influenced by it. They were in a dance, and it takes two to tango. Until they both acknowledge their own steps in that dance, they're going to keep stepping on each other's feet. The breakthrough moment on television is never as dramatic as people think. It's not usually a big, tearful Hollywood embrace. More often than not, it's a moment of silence. It's the quiet that descends after the truth has finally been spoken aloud, when the noise of the blame and the anger stops, and all that's left is the raw, uncomfortable reality of the situation. That's where we were with Mark and David. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a heavy exhaustion. I let them sit in that silence for a beat. It's important. It's the space where the things I've said can sink in, where they can move from the head to the heart. I say, breaking the quiet, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. The fact that you two fought this hard, this passionately, means that on some level, you still care deeply about what the other thought. You wouldn't have put this much energy into it if you were indifferent. This whole ugly war was a twisted, dysfunctional attempt to get your brother to see you, to hear you, to validate you. I look at Mark. You wanted him to see you as the responsible protector of your father's legacy. I look at David. You wanted him to see you as a brilliant visionary who could build upon that legacy. You both wanted the same thing, respect from each other, and you went about trying to get it in the most destructive way possible. The final phase of this isn't about me giving them a magic solution. I can't wave a wand and restore their business or erase the years of resentment. My job is to clear the fog so they can see the choices in front of them. The outcome is up to them. Are they going to choose to stay in their respective corners, clinging to their narrative of being the victim? Or are they going to choose to take a step, however small, toward a different future. So, where do you go from here? I asked them directly. The business is gone. The money is gone. Your father is gone. All you two have left is each other. Is that relationship worth anything to you? Is it worth salvaging? Or are you going to let this be the end of the story for the Sterling brothers? Mark is the first to speak. He looks at his hands, turning a pen over and over. He doesn't look at his brother. I don't know how, he says. His voice is flat, defeated. There's been too much damage, too many awful things said. I don't know how to undo it. You don't undo it, I tell him. You don't go back. You can't. The past is the past. All you can decide is what you do now. The first step isn't forgiveness. You're not there yet. The first step is a choice. You choose to stop the war. You choose to lay down your weapons. You choose to stop needing to be right more than you need to have a brother. I turn to David. He's been staring at the floor. He looks up and his eyes are red-rimmed. I never wanted any of this to happen, he says. I miss my dad. And after he was gone, I thought we'd have each other's backs. His voice breaks on the last few words. This is the most honest thing he's said all day. It's not a defense or an accusation. It's a pure statement of pain and loss. He's not the problem or the risk taker. He's a son who misses his father and feels abandoned by his brother. Suddenly, the dynamic on the stage shifts. For the first time, Mark looks at David not as his business adversary, but as his younger brother. I see a flicker of something in his eyes, the protective instinct that had been warped into control. I don't know what to do, David, Mark says, and his voice is softer than it's been all day. He's finally admitting he doesn't have the answers. For a man whose entire identity is built on being the one in charge, this is a huge concession. He's putting down his shield. What you do, I interject, providing a path, is you start a new conversation, not about the past, not about who's to blame for the Meridian. That conversation is over. You've both lost. The new conversation starts with something like this. I pause, letting them focus. Mark, you could turn to David and say, David, I acknowledge that my fear and my need for control made you feel unheard and untrusted. I was scared and I handled it badly. I contributed to this breakdown. That's it. It's not an excuse. It's an ownership of your part. David, you could turn to Mark and say, Mark, I acknowledge that I betrayed your trust. I went behind your back and was reckless with our family's legacy. I was desperate to prove myself, and I hurt you and our family in the process. It's not a justification. It's an ownership of your part. I'm giving them the script, not a script for a TV show, but a script for authenticity, a script for how to start rebuilding a bridge. I'm not asking them to forgive or forget. I'm asking them to acknowledge. Acknowledgement is the first indispensable step toward healing. You have to acknowledge the reality of the wound before you can ever hope to treat it. They are both quiet, processing. The audience is so still you could hear a pin drop. This is a sacred moment. Two human beings are standing at a crossroads. Down one path is more of the same, bitterness, isolation, regret. Down the other is a path that is difficult, uncertain, and painful, but that holds the possibility of reconciliation. Mark takes a deep breath. He turns his body on the chair to face his brother directly. David, he starts, and his voice is shaky. I was scared. After Dad died, I felt like the whole world was on my shoulders. And I'm sorry that I made you feel like you weren't a part of that, like I didn't trust you. It's not perfect, it's not everything, but it's a start. It's a crack of light in a dark room. David just nods, tears welling up in his eyes. He can't speak. He just nods. This isn't a neat and tidy ending. They aren't going to walk off my stage and magically reopen their business and be best friends tomorrow. The financial wreckage is real. The hurt is deep. I've arranged for them to see a family therapist, someone who can help them navigate the long road ahead. There will be setbacks. There will be days when the old anger flares up. The outcome here isn't about a guaranteed happy ending. The outcome is about a shift in trajectory. They came in on a path headed for total, permanent estrangement. They are leaving on a path that holds the potential for something different. They are leaving with a new understanding of what they were really fighting about. It was never about the concrete and steel of the Meridian project. It was about the fragile, invisible architecture of a family, the foundation of trust, the pillars of respect, and the bonds of brotherhood. And they now have a choice to either leave it all as a pile of rubble or to start brick by painful brick to rebuild. The choice, as always, is theirs.